Can you share with our audience what was your journey to the Virginia General Assembly?
Well, I like to joke that I'm an example of a nerd made good. When I was a kid, I was very interested in history and current events, and had a family that was very public service oriented. And the more I read about sort of particularly the 1960s and the civil rights movement, the more I felt that government was an important force for change. Politics looked fun, and I started volunteering in high school, really. And once the bug hit me, it never quite left.
What inspired your first General Assembly run?
Well, I had been volunteering on a lot of campaigns. I had interned at every level of government. Always thought that one day I would run for something. But when Viola Baskerville held the seat before me, she decided to run for lieutenant governor. A lot of friends started coming to me saying, why don't you run now? And the more I thought about it, I was like, why don't I run now? So I did.
Delegate, one of the things that you're carrying now, one of the pieces of legislation that you're sponsoring, has to do with the criminal justice system. Can you share that with our audience?
Sure. I actually have two. The first one is dealing with a court-appointed counsel. It's been a very long time since the level for determining if someone is indigent was set, and over time, what we think of as levels of poverty and the prices for lawyers have sort of gone sky high. And so what this bill does is update the definition of indigent so that more people can have access to court-appointed counsel, which in a lot of cases is critical to whether or not they will get a fair trial and true justice in the justice system. The other bill is one that was brought to me by the Innocence Project. As we've seen a lot of people who have been exonerated through DNA evidence who confessed to their crimes, there's been a lot of concern about how those confessions were obtained. And there's a general sense that if police interrogations were recorded, that would prevent some of these false confessions. And so this bill would require interrogations to be recorded when practical, and more importantly, ask the Department of Criminal Justice Services to come up with guidelines, sort of model policies that would apply when you do record these interrogations, so that sort of everybody is using what's considered to be best practices, rather than having different policies that would apply in different police departments across the Commonwealth.
So how would you respond to the law enforcement response to that is by saying that it's too restrictive? They could get a testimony from somebody or a confession. It could be thrown out because it was not taped or whatever. How would you respond to that?
Actually, the bill provides for that would not be grounds for throwing it out. So, I wouldn't quite call it a mandate. It's more of a strongly suggested policy. And so I think that would address that concern.
Just before we get into some of the other issues you're carrying, just in general, being a Democrat right now in the House, you're in the what I call super minority. I mean, it's really tough to get anything done. How do you stay inspired?
Honestly, I've been in the minority since I got here, so I learned pretty early on that if I wanted to get anything accomplished, that I would have to be practical. I'd have to reach across the aisle and convince people why it's in their interest to do what I'm asking them to do. And honestly, at the end of the day, I stay inspired because of the people that I help, constituents. I'm often stopped in the street and people thank me for helping them with various problems, or they thank me for giving them a voice. I have seen now, it'll be almost 10 years, I've seen examples where I have either stopped a bill or made it better based on a question I've asked in committee, based on a speech I've given on the floor. So I guess I've been lucky, and even though, a lot of what I'd like to see pass doesn't pass, you've got to enjoy the small victories and the small, incremental accomplishments that you can make.
Well said. When you're in that position, you have to look at minor things as major things if they do make a difference, especially serving your constituents. Now, Jennifer, I'm interested in one of the pieces of legislation that you have, which is to cap the co-pays insurance companies charge for prescription drugs. I know there are a lot of people struggling with so-called out-of-pocket costs for drugs, as well as those. So many of us, like me, have gone to an extremely high deductible plan now. Mm-hmm. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, what we've seen is there's certain drugs, and some of the examples are the ones that hemophiliacs are prescribed, multiple sclerosis drugs, that over time the drug companies have classified as tier 1 or specialty drugs, and by putting them in that category, it allows them, to charge these higher copays. What that does is for people with these chronic illnesses, a lot of times it puts their treatment out of their reach, and for these particular illnesses. I mean, for any illness, it's terrible when you have to, literally in some cases choose between food or your prescription drugs to keep you alive or functioning. But for these particular illnesses, that is even more burdensome. And so the idea here is to try to strike that balance to keep, these drugs within the reach of folks to be able to pay for them by keeping their out-of-pocket costs lower.
One of the cornerstones of Obamacare, Jen, was supposed to be handled within that. Now we find out that it hasn't, right?
Well, look, I'll be the first. I am not an expert on Obamacare, right. So I was presented with a problem, and that is still occurring, and looking for a way, at least here in Virginia, to solve that problem.
So right now, and I was just looking at this the other day. I had my staff do a little research on it. There's a maximum annual out-of-pocket cost for all medical expenses for like $6,600. So let's say that you've got your drug bill is, I don't know, $50,000. Well, the only way that is going to be paid for is by the insurance companies have to pay what the cap is and what the drug companies are charging. So at the end of the day, if the insurance companies have to pick up the tab for that, then theoretically, wouldn't that make insurance premiums go even higher?
Well, that's certainly the drug company's argument, and I think part of what we're trying to do is strike that balance between who can best bear that cost. More importantly, I think this is a conversation that we as a society need to have as to, look, if someone's going to pay for that, should it be spread more across everybody to keep costs lower among everybody, or are you going to put it all on the individual patients who if you price them to a point where they can't pay for their prescription drugs, sooner or later, we will be paying for their medical treatment, either because a lot of them will end up with needing more medical care, which could drive up costs for everybody else. So I think this is a conversation that we need to have. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but like most things, the first step is a conversation.
When I'm looking at this, you have to say to yourself, then, if the drug companies can charge whatever they please, and that's what they do, because as you know, under Obamacare, insurance companies have a level of transparency in how they behave because they can only take a 20% margin. 80% has to be spent on either medical or return. Drug companies can charge whatever they please. So if you really look at this like I have, it's like, okay, drug companies can charge whatever they please. Insurance companies have to cover the balance of it under what your legislation is. And so the question to me is, who pays in the end? And it seems like it's going to be consumers, right?
Possibly, but I think no matter what, in the end, consumers will pay more. It's just a matter of where that, how they're paying it.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Jen, I've got to get to ethics reform. $100. Looks like the speaker has settled on that. I've heard arguments on every side of this issue. What say you?
Well, I think we are starting to get consensus on $100. I think after the McDonald verdict, even those who weren't sure we needed reform said, I want bright line rules. So the public has been demanding we take action, for over a year now, and I think we're going to do it. We're trying to strike the right balance between ensuring that public officials not only can't be bought off, but that there isn't the appearance that they're being bought off. And we're trying to strike a balance between that and making sure that public officials, can do the things they need to do their job. And, I think that the governor's legislation, which comes that I'm carrying, that comes out of the commission, is a good next step in striking that balance.
So what happens after that? So you have $100 balance. I mean, my question is, why not just say wipe it out?
Well, because it depends on what's considered a gift. So I'll give you some examples.
Sure.
Part of the problem is you want to make sure there's as much transparency as possible. So I was appointed to the Southern Region Education Board, which is has legislators and public policy officials from across the country looking at education issues. They started out as an accrediting body for our colleges. They meet 3-4 times a year in different parts of the South. That entity pays my travel. Many would consider that a gift. Everyone would agree that needs to be reported, but I'm not sure people would say, well, you have to pay for that out of your own pocket. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to still make sure happen. And if you look at some of the gifts that we get invited to every community banquet, breakfast, gala, event you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And and you're expected to be there, and it's part of your duties representing the public to be there. Very few of us could afford to pay the ticket price for all of that. So again, I think most people would say, get a seat at the NAACP Freedom Fund banquet, not a problem. So that's why I think there's a problem saying just wipe it out across the board. And if you look at other states that have, gift bans or gift caps, they exclude those type of things, trips, entertainment, and meals. And by excluding them from the definition of a gift, they're not reported. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure you're still able to do what you need to do, but there's transparency.
Well, I think at the end of the day, there's got to be that level of transparency there, no doubt. We're just about out of time. We want to thank the delegate from Richmond, Democrat from the 71st District, Jennifer McClellan, for being with us. Hey, Jen, if people want to get in touch with your campaign or if they want some information on what your objectives are, what your agenda is, where do they go?
So I have a website. It's www.jennifermcclellan.com. On Facebook and Twitter. You can always call my office, 804-698-1071. I think those are the easiest ways to get me.
All right. We want to thank you for being with us. We will definitely have you back on. This is